everything looked like it should be perfect. The reality of living that was very different indeed. But you're at risk of burning out. You take a look in the mirror and am I glamorizing this burnout culture? Hustle culture has been a big thing over a lot of time. To bring in a culture that doesn't glamorize burnout and hustle culture, I really think there's another way to do it that is strategic and smart more than just hustle and burnout.
Welcome back to the Self-Aware Leader Podcast, the show that's dedicated to helping you lead with purpose, impact, and genuine well-being. Today, I want to ask you, the leader listening right now, are you truly building a sustainable future for yourself and your team? Are you on the fast track to burnout, sacrificing long-term potential for those short-term gains? Well, our guest today has not only navigated the high-stakes world of, he's been in finance, tech, and he's in startups. He's built and scaled multiple successful ventures. But he's also faced the very real challenge of burnout head on. That personal journey led him to create something truly revolutionary. We're going to have that in the show notes. We encourage you to click on it right now. Before you listen to this, it's prescribelife.ai, a platform leveraging AI and biomarker data to help high performers avoid the very trap and build lasting resilience. Oli today, he started from the bustling corporate towers of London to the sun-drenched, balance-focused now shores of Ibiza. Oli Johnson's story is a masterclass, guys, in reinventing leadership for sustainable growth. He embodies the shift from control to trust, from relentless grind to mindful innovation. So I want us to get ready today for a conversation. It's going to challenge your perspectives of success, and it's going to empower you to lead with greater awareness. Let's all welcome, guys, Oli Johnson.
Jason, hi. What a welcome and what an intro. It feels like a lot to live up to, but thank you very much. I appreciate it and great to be
here. No, that's great. Thank you. I appreciate it. I mean, just what you're doing to help leaders and founders and coaches is so awesome. I want to kind of start with your journey, Oli, if that's fine. From that high pressure corporate career in London to building this life that you focus, because the balance word is, I always call it the B word, for a lot of leaders, coaches, and founders. And they look at that and it's like, how can I help those that I'm coaching? How can I help those that I'm leading? How can even myself, how can I handle the pressure that's put on me nowadays? What does that look like? You moved to Ibiza, which is amazing. A lot of us have been there and seen what that was. When did that aha moment happen? And when did you realize that change was necessary?
Yeah, there's obviously quite a lot to unpack there. First thing I'd say is to make a distinction between me relocating from a major city. I'm from London and spent most of my life there previously, and moving to Ibiza, that felt like a big step for me. It's something that I really wanted to do, and there was an objective of having balance and having a different working life. I'm sure you can appreciate somewhere like London, just it would be in New York or Paris or any major city, that frenetic pace, that working life, that city life takes a lot out of you, no question. So I moved to Ibiza with my family with, sunshine and, beaches, all of that in mind, and balance being a key thing. That isn't what I found, to be perfectly honest. It's, you can take yourself into a different environment, and that doesn't necessarily solve how you're turning up every day and how you're living your life. So I certainly learned a lesson there that just changing location isn't by itself enough. And in fact, my major incidents with burnout came when I was living in Ibiza. I was building a business based back in London. I had co-founders and employees, a whole team in London, and I was commuting back and forth quite often. And really some of my toughest, hardest working times were whilst I was in that process. Yeah, I'd say I had a particular aha moment, but it was long after I moved to Ibiza. Yeah, it really came as a surprise, to be honest. It's not something that I had anticipated. It was one of those occasions where from the outside looking in, everything looked like it should be perfect. And if someone had told me 5 years before, this is where you'll be, the house, a young family, and, a business that was growing really fast, I would have said, wow, this is what success looked like. And actually, the reality of living that was very different indeed.
Yeah, and I know you experienced, and we'll get into that, as far as the burnout goes. But you've had extensive experience leading ventures across finance, technology, working with startups and, doing startups. What is the intense demands of startup life? And then how does that begin to shape burnout? And, because we all want resilience. Especially for founders that are listening, that's kind of the thing. It's like resilience. And so we kind of put ourselves to the corner, to the curb, and we just keep working. It's like 12, 15-hour days, 6, 7 days a week. This is what we do. So how did you begin to understand what burnout was and how were you experiencing it?
Yeah, so it's huge. I mean, firstly, I had that corporate background. I worked in investment banking, American investment banks, European investment banks. I worked for the Bank of England, which is, the equivalent of the Federal Reserve. And you're in a very structured environment. So obviously there's long working hours culture. There's a lot of pressure. It's high stakes. But that transition to being a founder and having your own venture, for me, I think the pressure cooker just gets turned up and turned on. And when you're carrying all of that weight of responsibility and you have these huge objectives, you have to think big. You have to have a big vision if you want to achieve something that's really worthwhile having. And suddenly you're wearing all of these different hats. You're employing people. You've got all these different, as a founder, you don't have all these resources at your disposal. You're being scrappy. That's the very nature of a startup. So suddenly you have to do all these different roles, which you're learning on the job effectively, and you're doing it pretty publicly, right? You have a team. You're active on social media, you have to get yourself out there. So you're pretty vulnerable at the same time. And then often, you're building the business at the same time as you're putting the foundations of the business in as well. So things like all those core functions, like whether it's HR or financial processes, whatever it may be, and then the core of, clients, delivery, all of those things together. So you have this huge level of pressure, and fundamentally, the job is never done. There's always else to do. And yeah, it's a lot. And then you throw in all the other things of like co-founder dynamics is a massive one. It's so often, Jason, it comes down to the human element, like all these other pressures. There's sales, there's revenue, there's cash flow. But when those human relationships break down or become strained or you have misalignment, that can really, really play on you mentally and, have a huge impact from a burnout and resilience perspective as well. So
Yeah, I have on our software leader community multiple DMs from founders. Do you think it's like on the burnout side of things, do you think it's more towards you're always hunting for money? I know that's a big thing, trying to raise capital. But then at the same time, there's this whole idea of like, do you feel like it's because everything's on me and it's not working and it's just so hard and the success rate is what, 10%, if that?
yeah, the success rate is scarily low. And I think, to be honest, to a certain degree, as a founder, you have to have belief. So you almost just have to ignore that statistic because if you didn't, then you wouldn't do it. And that's why most
Right.
people, I guess, don't. And yeah, I think you've hit on something really interesting there, talking about raising capital, for instance. So what I've noticed as a founder and spoken to many, many other founders about this as well, is there are certain pinch points and parts of the cycle that are particularly challenging as a founder where your mental health, your resilience is likely to be tested. And you've hit on one there. The raising is really challenging. There are times, and particularly now, there's not the sort of, the COVID money that was sloshing around for quite a few years where it was very easy to raise. Those days are long gone. It's challenging. It's a slog. This VCs are under a lot of pressure. There's been very few IPOs. So it basically slowed down the whole system. That's filtering through, and it's difficult to raise. So you have the pressure of raising, and then you have the pressure of how do you spend that money wisely, and then reporting back to your investors. You're hitting your milestones, hitting your metrics, and it goes on and on and on, right to the point of the exit. Very stressful as well. Could take months, can take a year, and then finally, perhaps counterintuitively, I spoke to a lot of founders post exit. They have this huge crash as well. And this sense of, oh my God, my business baby has been sold. And suddenly there's a loss of purpose too. So the whole way through the cycle, there are these challenges where different issues hit in different ways.
Yeah, no, I could imagine, all those markers that you've just nailed, it does seem like it's an impossible task and that belief has to be there. The payout is huge, so that's the beautiful part. Unfortunately, now we're seeing that, a founder can, by the time he raises the capital and goes through the rounds, he could have, a small percentage of the company actually, so it's giving, it's just constantly giving just to survive, and I talk to small business owners all the time and they're like, the biggest issues I have is three things. It's payroll.
Yeah.
So, and that's kind of what I wanted to get into in these high performance roles. What does it look like, with your platform? Why did you decide, okay, I'm going to do prescribedlife.ai? And, was that the mission, to help those that, to help these high performing roles, these people, to get something that they could grasp onto that would kind of be easy to use?
Yeah. So this for me, I mean, this is a longer answer, if I may, because I'll go
Yes, go ahead.
how I got here. Yeah. So for me, in my, in a previous startup, I completely went through the mill with burnout, and I ended up in a situation where, yeah, I had an exit, and it was a reasonable outcome, but it could have been a much better outcome. And one thing that I've learned, which I think is totally foundational, is it's always good when you're building a business to have a plan. You want to go in knowing what your exit plan is and knowing what that time frame is, at least projected. Obviously, things change, of course they do, but I had a 5-year plan to build and to exit. And despite it being a 5-year plan, I treated it like a sprint rather than a marathon, and that'd be unsustainable. So, within a couple of years, I frankly been doing back-to-back 80, 90-hour weeks consistently, and all the good stuff in my life had fallen by the wayside. My connection, my family really suffered. I had young daughter, a toddler at the time who I was seeing nowhere near enough. Time with friends, exercise, health and well-being, everything went by the wayside. And that it came at a huge cost. And, there was a point where, yeah, frankly, I was just completely on the edge. I was flying back. I had a particular aha, the worst kind of aha moment you could have, really, where I was flying back to London, and I think I had 4 days of just back-to-back hell lined up, basically. Really high-pressure sales meetings, client meetings, board meeting, founder showdown meeting. We were doing some media recording as well. It was just stress and overwhelm. And I was on the flight back to London, and I remember clearly just looking out the window thinking, do you know what, if this plane goes down, I'm not going to care. And that is, from the outside, I had this really high performance business that was growing rapidly. I left my lovely home in a Mediterranean island with a beautiful family who I love to bits. Everything screamed success from the outside, but it completely crushed me. And it was such a wake-up sign. It was a horrible situation to find myself in. Yeah, I exited earlier than I would have done, and I knew that I wanted to come back and do something with impact. And whilst I was recovering, it taught me, first of all, preventative is 100% better than trying to restore your health. Prevention is absolutely key. And I wanted to come back and help people from falling into the same trap that I had, effectively. So I took our time to recover. I had 6 months. I did almost nothing, reconnected my family, went away to Asia in a beautiful environment, and just really focused on getting my health back together. But what I really wanted to do was understand how to help others. And I spent a lot of time learning about burnout, learning about resilience, and how we can help others. And yeah, through continual learning and looking at different solutions, basically we're bringing something to market which has that tech element. So there's scalability there. And really it's around that preventative approach, identifying trends, using the very latest cutting edge AI supported health tech to give people that indication and those markers to know, yeah, you're at risk of burning out. You're on this trend, and we're integrating with coaches so that we can help them to help their clients as well. And it's all about getting there before it happens and making sure that people don't burn out and they stay resilient long term.
Yeah, I want to get into the tech side of things here in a second, but I want to kind of go back to when you were on that plane and you were, thinking because like I said, I have a lot of leaders that will text me and, they're like, I'm going to the hospital multiple times a month. I'm talking like 20, 30-year-olds, and you look really young. So it's like, why is there no prevention? Is it just because you feel like there's this demand on you and you're the only one that can handle this? Is it because you're running with like scarcity mindset, or like there's not enough money to hire the people that you need? I think if you had to put the responsibility on the person, what do you think it is that causes the throwing up, the crying, all these different things that it is?
Yeah, there are a few things there. Definitely, I think to have a venture in the first instance, you have to have a certain amount of commitment. If you think, if you want to be successful, you have to fully commit. I don't really think it's possible to run a venture like that without going all in. So first of all, you've got everything's in the ring, basically. You're putting everything on the line. So that naturally breeds a desire to make sure you're doing everything you can to deliver. Certainly at the early stages as well, before the scale up stage, when you don't have the resources and you're having to do all these different things, then I think there's a natural proclivity to go in and just try and do everything. Certainly I think from my side, I think there was a degree of naivete and maybe even a little foolhardiness as well, of thinking, well, a lot of people who haven't burnt out yet think I'm going to be fine and I put my hand up to be like, yeah, I'm fine. I'm okay. Yeah, this is unpleasant. I'm going to get through it. Honestly, my thought pattern was, it's only 5 years. You can do 5 years. 5 years and you'll be out. It's all good. I tell you, that just doesn't work. It really doesn't. And the other danger, and this to me is really critical. I think if there are any startup founders out there listen to this, or even leaders as well, this is something that I look back on, and because it affected others, it's actually something I'm a little bit ashamed of, and it's not something I really would like to talk about, but I feel it's important to. As a leader, if you're behaving like that, if that's how you're showing up and it's your startup, you're defining the culture of your business, and then others are taking that from you and you're cascading that through. Now, I look back on that culture that I was building, and I was responsible for that. And the fact that I was available 24/7 the whole way through the week, I was sending emails and messages on Saturday, Sunday. That's a horrible way to operate. And particularly, at least as a founder, okay, you have all that responsibility, but you also have all that potential upside. But when you have employees, you're basically almost foisting that onto them as well. And I feel that the culture has shifted over the last 5 or 6 years, particularly post-COVID. I think there's more understanding. And certainly I'm much more aware of it. That company culture that you're introducing into your venture is critical. Culture is so important for the survival and the thriving of a venture. If you get that wrong and you're showing up in that way, then you're going to infect the whole operation of the company. So I think, if anybody feels like, maybe they take a look in the mirror and like, am I glamorizing this burnout culture? Am I introducing this? Yeah, I'd say it's definitely worth examining that closely and seeing if you can change it.
What do you think? What do you think that comes from, that need to, as a leader, to, because I've fallen into the same trap. It's like, yeah, I'm going to send this, for me, it's ego. It's like, yeah, I'm going to send this at 10 a.m., 10 p.m. at night on a Sunday. What do you think that comes from? Is it a desire? You're struggling, that burnout's hitting you and you're struggling. So you kind of want to get this feeling of like you're doing something. Why do you think it's so toxic? One, and then number two, why do founders and leaders do it?
Yeah, I think using the word ego there is transparent and honest. I think there is, if you examine yourself, I think most people, if they examine themselves, there is a glamorization around working. So that hustle culture, I think there's been a bit of a pendulum swing. Maybe it changes around a little bit, but that hustle culture has been a big thing over a lot of time. And there's something associated with long working hours and just grinding all the time round the clock. And yeah, I think if I'm honest with myself as well, there was certainly a stage of my venture then that I was looking for other people to be working as hard as I was working, because I want the success. I want the business to succeed. And I kind of felt, if we're working around the clock, there's more chance of it happening. And that's where, from my view, it's that short-termist view. Yes, you blind out, you might get this project over the line in time, you might get this feature shipped, you might get this extra client, there might be those shorter-term wins. But I would advise the strategic view is the important one. Don't have the 2-3 year view, have the 5-year view, have the 10-year view, look ahead. And again, if you build the right company and culture, that success will come. It might feel like it's taking a little bit longer, but actually you're going to have sustainability, which long term is going to give you far more success.
Yeah, there's a founder that I worked with, and he had that, the grinding culture. I understand that, and I get it. I get the whole thing. The Goldman Sachs. I mean, you were in finance, you understand that too. Not calling them out. I'm just saying, they're kind of the pinnacle. Yeah, they're kind of the pinnacle for that. But what I noticed was, it causes the founder to resent his employees, because like you said, they're not working as hard as I am. But what I'm doing is unrealistic and leading to burnout. And all I'm going to do is cause my employees to do the same thing. And so now you're not operating in trust. You're operating in this toxic paradigm of resentment, and no relationship is going to last in that. Because your employees are like a relationship. If you did that to your wife or your partner, it would be, it would be done in 6 months. Did you feel did you have that anger, or that, like, why aren't you working? It's Saturday. Why isn't everybody on board? It was that toxic feeling with you too?
That does creep in. It can creep in. I think from my perspective, I always managed to keep a hold on the asymmetric nature of the relationship with employees, because it was one thing for me to grind like that, because I have most of the upside. Yes, we had some options, some equity for some of our employees, not for everybody. So it would be completely unfair and unrealistic to expect the same level of commitment, because I was the one, yes, I was carrying the risk, but I was also carrying the upside. So it
Mm.
was something different. But there is some nuance there. And you've hit on something interesting, because where that isn't asymmetrical generally is the co-founder relationship. And that's when it gets really gnarly. So if you have a team of co-founders, particularly if there's more than two of you, it can happen with any number. But if you have a misalignment on your founder ethics, on, your work ethic, how much you're going to commit, what you're contributing, that is when it gets truly difficult. Because if you have founder misalignment, that's a major reason why startups fail. So often it comes down to the human dynamics. I mean, let's be honest here. So a lack of product market fit is a major reason why businesses fail, why startups fail. But the human dynamics underpinning it are another major reason. And yeah, those working ethics in general amongst co-founders is massive. If you find yourself misaligned, and that can come, through different types of values as well. I talks about company values in terms of burnout, etc. But values more generally within a company, I think I was quite naive coming into that venture, not really fully understanding how crucial those values are. And when you have those different views on values and their importance of, in the hierarchy, then that could cause a lot of tension, and that can easily spill out to startup failure.
Yeah, I want to ask one last question on this, and then we're going to spend the rest of the time on prescribedlife.ai, because I want to make sure that everyone has this tool to be able to be helped. Co-founders, is it usually what you see? You said ethics, and I think that's so important. There's a lack of communication. Like, one has the initial investment, the money, but they're doing other things. And then the guy that's the hard charging doesn't have anything, but he's got the vision and the plan. He's the one that's working so much, and then that ends up cracking. Is that normally what you see?
There's certainly an example. It certainly can be. Like, often when you're, good practice when you're teaming up as co-founders, you each want to be bringing something else to the table. So when that skills and that makes sense, if you've got someone who's a marketing genius, and then you've got someone who's amazing technically, say they're a coder and they're bringing those two skills together, that and his example is a very powerful team. That's really, really strong. The example you sketched out there, I think that's more challenging when someone who's bringing money to the table. That's something you're having, it might be a previous exit, it might be family wealth, it might be something else that's come along. That's something that you're bringing. And obviously that's highly valuable, from a startup perspective. You need money to get off the ground almost always. That's asymmetrical as well when someone's grinding and putting in all their time. So that's a very uneven way to get started, which I think can definitely cause some tension. And my experience of speaking to other founders and what I've seen personally is when there feels like a mismatched effort, that's when things really can spiral. There are so many things that can go wrong, but that's definitely a cause for tension.
Yeah, I could imagine. I want you, if you don't mind, walk us through how prescribedlife.ai uses AI in biomarker data, the face scanning health features, and how it detects burnout early and how it transitions into human-led support.
Yeah, certainly. So a number of threads are pulled together for that. I think, first of all, I'd say more broadly, just to kind of paint the macro drivers and the background. Something I found very interesting this year, particularly. So in the first quarter of this year, I think it says around $780 billion US dollars of investment in the EU tech market for health tech, particularly, has inflown. And that's a huge figure that hasn't been seen since the COVID times when, basically money was effectively free. So what's happened is the introduction of AI has unlocked this wave of investment into health tech, because it's just upscaled everything and made so many things really, really interesting, and just, something that people couldn't really have imagined, a few years ago. So it's really changed the landscape and made it very interesting. And within that, there are a few trends that particularly stand out, and it's the sort of the area that we are operating within. So the first thing I'd say is around preventative health. It's a really big trend at the moment. And my view is that for the future, this is where everything's going. And it really makes sense. If you think about the healthcare system at the moment, so much of it is so reactive. Like people get sick, you go into hospital, you get treated, and have these horrible recovery periods. It's a very bad experience for you personally. And what we're finding now with AI and some of the med tech that is coming along is that we have these things that can give real strong indications earlier on to prevent things before they occur. And, if I take that back to my personal experience with burnout, burning out and then recovering was really painful, had a massive impact, financial impact, personal impact, it impacted my family. It was horrible. There are ways now where you can have early warning indicators and looking after yourself better to make sure that doesn't happen. And the outcome of that is so much better. And, from a business perspective, which is really interesting, the World Health Organization with the World Economic Forum put out a study around, I think it was 2023. And they basically estimated that there's $1 trillion impact to the global economy each year through mental ill health, and burnout basically contributes a large proportion of that. So rather than just a personal health crisis, it's actually something that has this huge impact to the bottom line, which a lot of people don't really think of. If you think of a high performing leader in a role in a big corporation, for instance, and burnout is so prevalent. And when an individual like that burns out, you have this cycle where there'll be poor decision making. There'll be things that happen which will impact the bottom line directly. And then that individual, they then need to go off sick. They then need to recover for 6 months. They may not return. And then you have all these costs around an individual not coming back and having to be replaced. So you have this huge impact effectively. So with the new technologies, we're using several things we're putting together. So one is using biomarker data. So we can pull that in from wearables, if people are using a Whoop or an Oura Ring or something like that. We also have this amazing piece of kit, which just if you're not using a wearable, we're using the inbuilt camera on any smartphone. And just with a 60-second facial scan using that inbuilt camera, we're reading the blood flow as it pulsates beneath the skin on your face. And from there, we get this highly accurate biomarker data. Heart rate variability is a really strong indicator on stress. And, we can infer that with clinical accuracy just through this facial scan. So it's pretty amazing technology. We're also doing stuff around genetics as well. So your actual genetic makeup. So we can test for your resilience markers. And just to bring that to life a little bit, it's obviously quite a complicated subject. But I use this on myself and it's been totally transformative. So my personal genetic makeup, I'm really predisposed to anxiety. So anxiety is something that's stayed with me a lot of my life, unfortunately. That comes with lack of sleep as well, sometimes my concentration levels. So looking at my genetic profile, I've been able to have a highly personalized neurosupplementation protocol, and the impact that's had on anxiety levels completely reduced, sleep. And that obviously impacts things like focus, brain functions. It's like a shortcut to having a complete uplift in your performance. So, there's an interesting point where burnout and resilience, the prevention of it and staying resilient, actually that link with performance is really interesting. So, you just perform at such a higher level. You're able to make decisions better. So it's, has a direct impact on your performance and bottom line. So yeah, it's interesting.
I want to get into this because I think it's so interesting. So I have Oura Ring on right now. I'm always looking. It tells me if I'm stressed or not. Tells me I get a crown for my sleep. My HRV, which is really low, but I run and do cardio all the time, so I have no idea, and I'm not stressed, so I don't know where that's coming from. But you mentioned all these different biomarkers, and then bringing it to a point of like custom supplementation. Like, oh, I need vitamin D or I need magnesium. How are you pulling in all of that? Like you mentioned the HRV and the supplementation. Can you kind of go into that a little bit more? What is the experience if I go on the platform? I know you're still in beginning stages of everything, but what is the future of that? What will that look like on your platform for like me as a leader?
Yeah, certainly. So one thing I would say is that there can be an overwhelm of data, like somebody collecting all this data is like, what are you going to do with it? And from a health tech perspective, there's definitely risk of just, bamboozling a user with
Burnout on data. Yeah.
Totally, yeah. It can be really overwhelming. It can be off-putting. And from a commercial perspective as well, people are more likely to disengage if you give this tsunami of data. So it's important how you use it. So the way we're using it, and this is where again, where the AI component comes in. So we have an LLM interface whereby we're actually interacting with the individual on a regular basis. And it's tuned into the frequency that they wish to interact. Again, not wanting to overwhelm an individual. And what we built is effectively it's a human resilience engine, and the AI is running across all these different components, pouring in data, pulling in this data, and then that is making decisions around how to help the individual with that very rich data set. So instead of the human having to interpret it, we're using it in a very, very smart way to effectively digest and then present the best possible way that someone's going to respond. And then the way that we're actually taking this to market is we are partnering with executive coaches. And why that's important is, I had a coach, by the way. I had a coach, I had a therapist, I had a mentor when I went through my through my burnout incidents. And, my big thing was I didn't have any data and I ignored a lot of the advice I was getting, even, with a fantastic mentor who'd been there and done that before me. It was telling me, on a regular basis, this is unsustainable. You're going to burn out. And I just, I ignored that bit of advice because I thought, well, I'm going to be fine. And, what we're finding is, we talked to many, many exec coaches, and often we found they're on a bit of a continuum. So on the one end, you get the high performance coaches who are really data driven, be all over the biomarker data, Oura rings, that kind of stuff. On the other end of the continuum, I might unkindly describe as, a bit of a Luddite type approach. And they'll be very focused on classic kind of exec type functions like, strategy, execution, all really important. Somewhere around the middle, we find there's a lot of coaches who they are focused on leadership, execution, strategy, but they also really understand that the resilience of the individual is paramount because it's the foundational layer to all that other success. And just someone who's in burnout or early stages of burnout, it's very difficult. People don't listen, people don't perform as well. So those kind of coaches, we're creating something that really helps. So the end user, their client actually has the app on their phone, they get all this data, and we have a platform whereby the coaches get those data-driven insights on their clients. So let's say you have a 2-week gap between seeing your client and then seeing them again. In that time, they then have all this data, these data points, and things around mood as well as the biomarkers, things about how they're showing up on a day-to-day basis, the sleep, the supplementation, everything that really shows what's happening. And the other thing to say as well is that, it's not just these different biomarker things, but what happens on a day-to-day basis, what impacts your resilience, human relationships, like sometimes for me, I've had challenges in professional relationships, which have literally kept me up at night. And that's impacted my resilience as well. It's impacted how I'm showing up. So we're collating data around that as well. And that's so useful for a coach because then, rather than forgetting things between sessions, they really get to see what's impacting somebody. And it's just a very, very strong way to help them on a data-driven approach.
Yeah, no, that's amazing because that data will allow them to be able to, like you said, fill the gap and then be like, you only got 3-4 hours of sleep the other night. Normally you get 6 or 7. What's happening there? So you're, as a coach, you're able to be able to ask those questions, So like looking ahead, what do you see the future prescribedlife.ai? What is, how is it going to evolve, 2 years from now, 3 years from now? What does that role look like, on your platform?
Well, we're at this really interesting intersection between AI, which is obviously, exploded everywhere and having a huge impact, health tech, and then coaching tech as well. So it's a curious space, and a lot of things are happening in a short space of time. My vision for this, and what I really think is so important, is what we are building is an enabler for coaches. What this 100% isn't is a replacement for coaches. I think that human element is incredibly important, but I do think that we can empower coaches with a new set of data and, a vision into their individual clients that really can help them. So I see this as an augmentation of that coaching environment rather than a replacement, and really just leveraging the power of AI, the power of health tech, all of this technology that's come along, but keeping that human touch as well. And that's really what I see coming to the fore.
Of our self-aware leaders and listeners, and we're constantly striving for sustainable growth and personal development. What do you think is the single most impactful takeaway you hope that they gain today from your conversation?
I think it's a combination of two things, if I may. So definitely having, for any startup founders, I urge you to think of this as a marathon and not a sprint, particularly if you're early on in the journey. Please, I urge you, to think about this strategically. And I can almost guarantee you'll have a much better outcome if you have that approach rather than treating it as a sprint. And for leaders more generally, the point around culture and you being the one who's defining that culture. And culture is not about writing some values on a board and then walking away. It's about how you're showing up. It's a set of human behaviors that you're enacting every day. So I urge you to bring in a culture that doesn't glamorize burnout and hustle culture. I really think there's another way to do it that is strategic and smart and will support your business goals and bottom line more than just hustle and burnout.
I love that. And it's incredibly insightful. And this conversation has been amazing, Oli. I want to thank you so much for sharing your deeply personal journey. You opened up and shared that with our listeners, and then your entrepreneurial wisdom and your innovative approach to solving, I think this is one of the most critical challenges facing leaders today, and that's burnout. And your work with prescribedlife.ai, it's not just about technology. I believe it's empowering leaders and coaches to build healthier, more sustainable, and truly thriving organizations. And that's what we want. And that you're helping the world by doing that. So thank you, Oli.
Thanks, Jason. I really appreciate it. It's been great speaking with you today. Really enjoyed it.